ReZero Arc 7, Chapter 53. This is the next in anime Season 4. Darkness closed in on Natsuki Subaru as he sat collapsed, utterly spent. Countless black tendrils, spiraling like a whirlpool, reached for him, wrapping around his body and soul, and everywhere they touched felt like melting, crumbling, coming apart, his very existence being erased. Strangely, he felt no pain at all. Instead, a strange peace settled over him, because in the depths of his heart, all he wanted was to disappear, to be ground into ash, even if it meant reviving over and over, only to be destroyed again. The shadow seemed to answer that wish, whispering, "I love you," into his ears again and again, an unbearable, maddening repetition. Subaru silently screamed at it to stop, insisting he already knew he was loved. His parents loved him with their whole hearts, he was certain of that. But despite being loved, he could never love himself. Someone he believed had no worth. The whispering only intensified, repeating, "I love you," dozens of times without pause, until Subaru's resolve nearly broke. If enduring this torment to the end meant the shadow would finally swallow him whole and erase him from existence forever, he would accept it. He wanted it to be the end. Just as he teetered on the edge of surrender, a voice like a silver bell cut through the endless confession of love. A blast of light tore into the shadowy limbs engulfing him, snapping one off in a shockwave, though it was only one among thousands, a drop in an ocean of malice indifferent to the strike. The one who had struck that blow pressed forward anyway, dodging and weaving through the shadow's grasping arms with astonishing agility, calling out Subaru's name. It was Emilia. She seized his limp hand and hauled him up, dragging him away with all her strength. The shadow lashed out to block their escape from both front and back, but Emilia didn't stop moving, thrusting out her free hand to conjure a brilliant crystal of ice, the same kind that had once caged Subaru, and used it to smash a path through the writhing black wall. Watching the shadow get cleaved apart, Subaru, who'd assumed nothing could resist its hunger, felt his frozen heart stir again despite himself. Silver hair shining like moonlight, Emilia kept pulling him forward, but he felt no joy at his own survival. If anything, something inside his skull felt ready to crack. He had made sure Julius, Beatrice, and Echidna were alive before leaving them behind, and now he could only assume they'd all died in his absence. Julius left to the witch beasts and the monstrous reed. Beatrice fading away after protecting him. Echidna succumbing to unbearable suffering he'd been powerless to ease. Subaru saw himself as plague incarnate, a being who spread death and misfortune to everyone around him, no matter what he did. He wrenched his arm free and forced his feet to stop, refusing to be pulled along further. Despite the obvious difference in their strength, his desperate resolve held firm, and Emilia, sensing something dark and immovable in his eyes, let go. They stood facing each other, alone now, the shadow nowhere in sight, as if it had been the very thing meant to erase Subaru completely. He turned cruel, twisting his words to wound her, demanding to know why she'd bothered saving someone she'd suspected was a fake, why she hadn't just left him to die in the ice cage. Emilia's eyes narrowed in anger. She insisted she never wanted to kill him, that she only wanted to understand what was different about him, why he'd hidden his lost memories. But Subaru spiraled further, screaming that everyone who trusted him, Emilia, Julius, Beatrice, had been fools to believe him so easily, that Ram and Echidna's initial suspicion had been the only sane response. Then, breaking down, he confessed the deaths. Echidna had bled out in agony after both her legs were blown off. Beatrice had died protecting him, having severed her own tail to save him, vanishing peacefully the moment she knew he was safe, even after swearing she'd never forget him and would help him recover his memories no matter what. Subaru raged that if he'd only noticed sooner, if he'd never taken her from wherever she'd come from, she might still be alive.
He assumed Julius too was already dead, left behind with the terrifying witch beasts and Reed, having told Subaru to go on without him. Consumed by self-loathing, Subaru spat that everyone around him was an idiot for trusting him, for apologizing to him, for wanting him back. Undeserved gestures towards someone so pathetic, so incapable of saving anyone. He insisted he wasn't the real Natsuki Subaru they wanted, that everything he'd shown or said was worthless, meaningless noise, that he was scum who deserved no forgiveness and no place beside any of them. He muttered that it didn't have to be him, that someone smarter, someone stronger should take his place, that Natsuki Subaru, as they knew him, no longer existed, was never even real to begin with. Then Emilia spoke, and everything shifted. She recounted, gently but vividly, the memories she shared with the real Subaru. How they'd first met at the loot house in the royal capital, when Felt stole an important insignia from her. How they'd chased her down, clashed with Meili's sister, been rescued by Reinhard, and then Subaru had saved Emilia himself when Meili's sister turned on her, getting seriously hurt in the process. She described being brought back to Roswell's mansion, treated by a grumbling Beatrice, growing close with Ram and Rem, defending against a witch beast attack alongside Ram while Roswell finished the enemy off, and the promise of a date Subaru had made her. She mentioned the mayonnaise making, the drinking, Puck's snow, playing the King's game, her being summoned to the royal capital for the royal selection, and their first serious fight. Emilia's fear of him getting hurt for her sake,
of not understanding why he was so kind to her. She recalled how he'd come running back to her at her lowest point. Her voice trembled as she asked if he remembered what he'd said to her after that. He didn't. He had nothing, no memory of any of it, not one fragment. Envy and shame burned through him at his own inadequacy compared to the version of himself Emilia described. He assumed she and everyone else must secretly wish for the return of the real Subaru and want him gone. But instead of confirming that fear, Emilia said she remembered everything, every promise, every word, every action, with nothing but joy and hope in her smile, no trace of sadness. Undone by this, Subaru erupted again, screaming that he didn't remember any of it, demanding to know who they were all talking about, insisting that risking one's life for someone else, giving everything for someone else, wasn't something he was capable of. He declared that whoever had done those things couldn't be Natsuki Subaru, because he knew exactly how pathetic, disgusting, and worthless the real Natsuki Subaru was. There was no way anyone could actually believe in him, forgive him, or want him around. He muttered that it didn't have to be him standing there. Someone better should take his place. Then Emilia cut through his despair with quiet finality. "My name is Emilia. Just Emilia." She said there was so much she needed to ask him and tell him, but first she needed to know one thing. She spoke of protecting him, of not wanting him to die, of the friends currently absent and in danger, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and resolve. Then she asked him plainly who he was, and asked him to tell her his name. In that question, Subaru recognized not a rejection of the person before her, but an affirmation of him. It would have been easier, he thought, if she'd said he was a fake and demanded the real Subaru back. That was what he'd expected, almost wanted. But instead, everyone who had spoken to him, regardless of his strength or memory, had continued to want him, specifically him. Confused, he asked her why. What could someone as weak, foolish, and broken as him possibly offer? Emilia admitted that yes, there were people stronger and smarter than him, but she wanted to be with him regardless, because being helped by someone she cared about meant far more to her than being helped by someone merely capable. And she said this while smiling, blushing faintly. The declaration hit Subaru like a physical blow.
his heart pounding as scorn and disbelief mixed with rising emotion inside him. He marveled bitterly at the version of himself who'd apparently fallen for someone this far out of his league. A knight who trusted him, a woman who forgave him, a girl who believed in him. And now this beautiful girl in front of him who openly wanted him, not out of obligation, but out of genuine feeling. Emilia repeated her name and her request once more, and this time, Subaru didn't deny it.
Hesitating only briefly, he decided that if there existed a version of himself trusted by Julius, believed in by Beatrice, forgiven by Echidna, and desired by Emilia, then that was the identity he would claim. He declared, with as much conviction as his broken body could muster, that he was Natsuki Subaru. Not because his memories had returned, but because he chose to become the person capable of earning what they'd given him. He hadn't forgiven himself for the deaths he blamed himself for, and doubted he ever fully would. But that no longer mattered as much as his resolve to save them all, if it was within his power. The moment shattered almost immediately. A shadow crushed the walkway they stood on, and the tower itself began collapsing around them, chunks of stone breaking away into the sand below. Emilia lost her footing and began to fall. Subaru barely caught his own balance before diving after her, wrapping his arms around her to shield her body as they fell together. She struggled against him, trying to reposition herself to take the brunt of the impact instead, but it was futile. Beneath them waited neither solid floor nor open dunes, but the same pitch-black shadow that had been devouring the tower all along. As the two of them fell together, embracing, Subaru made an internal vow. Even if everyone around him eventually forgot every word exchanged between them, he never would. He would remember all of it, cling to all of it, and build himself into someone worthy of what they'd already given him unconditionally. As the shadow swallowed them both, everything dissolved towards zero, an ending that was, in truth, the start of an entirely new beginning. The fight to reclaim the name and identity of Natsuki Subaru had only just begun. Consciousness crawled back to Natsuki Subaru through a thick, choking darkness that felt like it had seeped into his very blood, coating his skin and soul alike in something like scab tissue, until he could no longer tell what shape his true self even held. Deeper still, at the level of his soul, that same corrosion spread, and for a moment he felt fingers reaching toward him through the wreckage of his own identity, recoiling not from cruelty, but from a strange revulsion, an uncertainty over whether the self waiting ahead was even real anymore, whether the place that would accept him, forgive him, believe in him, actually existed. Just as the doubt threatened to swallow him whole, a voice whispering, "I love you," dissolved the darkness into light, and Subaru's soul returned to his body. He woke with a hoarse, weary sigh, relieved simply to find he could still speak. Beside him, Emilia's voice, like the chime of a silver bell, asked if he was okay, if he could move, if he could talk. Turning to face her amethyst eyes, Subaru's heart pounded so hard from her beauty that he flushed red and made an idiot of himself, babbling nonsense until Emilia grew worried he'd been more seriously hurt than she realized. Beatrice's irritated voice pulled his attention next, and upon seeing her very much alive, Subaru pulled her into a tight embrace, overwhelmed with relief, showering her with affection until she squirmed and protested. But the emotional weight of everything crashed down on him at once, and he began to cry, shoulders trembling, as both Emilia and Beatrice gently reassured him that he didn't need to rush, that they were right there with him. Their unwavering kindness, giving precedence to him even after enduring a world that had ended around them, steadied Subaru's resolve. He murmured that he had returned, and with that, a new loop began. This time with Subaru determined to reclaim everything as himself. At breakfast, Subaru calmly informed the assembled group that he'd lost his memories in the TVQ.A library, triggering a wave of confusion. Emilia defended him gently, but Ram remained openly suspicious, folding her arms and accusing him of putting on a farce.
Beatrice spoke up in his defense, noting that he'd been in genuine distress, even crying when he first realized his memory loss. Subaru asked everyone to simply accept the situation and move forward. And though Ram couldn't voice outright agreement, neither Amelia's nor Beatrice's support left much room for rebuttal. Looking around the table, Subaru registered the surreal relief of seeing everyone alive again. Julius, whom he'd last left to face Reed and the witch beasts. Echidna, who had died apologizing to him with her legs blown off. Shawla, who had vanished amid the chaos. And Ram, who in the previous loop had never reconciled with him. Maylie, the young assassin with dark blue braided hair, addressed him casually, and Subaru struggled to hide his shock at seeing her alive and unbothered, given what he knew of her role in his prior deaths. He explained his amnesia as selectively affecting memories of people rather than general knowledge, prompting a visibly troubled reaction from Julius and Echidna, while Shawla made her usual absurd jokes about being forgotten, and Echidna proposed investigating the TVQ.A library as the likely source of the memory loss. Subaru then suggested everyone take a break, offering to fetch water with Ram as a pretext to speak with her privately. Once alone with Ram at the well, she demanded to know the true meaning behind his announcement, revealing that her repeated rejection of his amnesia claim each loop stemmed from her devotion to her sleeping sister, Rem. She couldn't bear the possibility that Subaru, who had some unknown but clearly significant bond with Rem, might have severed that connection through forgetting. Subaru gently but firmly told her the truth. He really had lost his memories, retaining only names and basic relationships, nothing more. Enraged and frightened, Ram grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall, her crimson eyes burning with a fury that Subaru recognized was actually barely restrained grief. He held his ground and declared, with full conviction, that he would get Rem back no matter what. Not because he remembered his bond with her, but because he had witnessed firsthand how desperately Ram loved and needed her sister returned. And he wanted to fulfill that promise, both for Rem's sake and for the sake of the Natsuki Subaru everyone believed in. He told Ram to hold on to her anger and unleash it on him later if he ever broke that promise. To burn him, scorch him, do whatever she wanted if he gave up. Ram scoffed, denied ever having cried over it, and slapped him hard across the face for good measure, deflating the tension. She admitted, half mockingly, that the Subaru she knew from before was hardly some competent hero, short-tempered, forgetful, meddling, prone to making messes worse when he tried to fix things alone, but conceded, with a noticeably warmer tone, that he had always cherished Rem deeply. She asked him directly whether he'd truly forgotten her sister, and when he confirmed it, she extracted a vow from him, that he would remember Rem again, no matter what, even if it cost him his life. Subaru swore he would remember everything, not just Rem, and satisfied, Ram released her hostility, telling him to stand and stop groveling. As they walked back together, Subaru quietly asked her whether the Natsuki Subaru from before had really existed, and Ram, without turning to look at him, replied that he hadn't disappeared, only been buried for now, like flowers under snow, waiting to resurface once the season changed. Reflecting afterward, Subaru resolved to handle this loop with more care and openness, recognizing that his own suspicion and self-isolation in the previous timeline had needlessly hurt the people trying to protect him. He turned his mind to the source of his amnesia, suspecting the TVQ.A library, and grimly recalled the horrors of the 2 prior loops, discovering the corpses of nearly everyone in one, and watching his comrades die in real time in the other, resolving to prevent those disasters from repeating. As he stood deep in thought, he sensed a faint presence sneaking up behind him, and spun around just in time to catch a pair of hands reaching to shove him from the height he stood at, He caught his attacker's arm before she could fall, revealing her to be a small, light-framed girl, Mei Li, and with a knowing smile, informed her that they were about to have a very important conversation about her having killed him twice already. Having caught Mei Li mid-attempt to shove him down the spiral staircase, Subaru confirmed what he'd suspected. This girl had been the one responsible for killing him twice before in previous loops. Mei Li, startled at first, quickly recovered her composure, sliding into a saccharine smile and denying any murderous intent, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that if she'd truly wanted him dead, she would have done it out in the sand dunes, rather than here in the tower.
Subaru acknowledged the logic but pointed out that her urge to kill him had clearly ignited only since the previous night, calling it a chain reaction from something specific that happened. Caught off guard, Mei Li dropped the act, grumbling about being cornered, and accused Subaru of orchestrating this entire confrontation as a trap, testing her loyalty by faking amnesia to see whether she'd take the opportunity to eliminate an obstacle. Subaru firmly denied it, insisting his memory loss was completely genuine. But Mei Li remained skeptical, sarcastically musing about how easily she could still kill him now that no one else was around, gesturing toward her own neck as a chilling reminder of her methods. Rather than threaten her back, Subaru calmly told her he had no intention of hurting or punishing her, that he intended to keep treating her exactly as he had before, memory loss and all, and that so long as her murder attempt stayed buried, everything could continue as normal. This response completely destabilized Mei Li. She'd expected retaliation or accusation, not forgiveness, and she reacted with disbelief bordering on panic, repeating, "I can't believe it," while anxiously fidgeting with her braid, a nervous habit Subaru recognized as tied to her attachment to someone with a similar hairstyle. She demanded to know what exactly he thought he understood about her, and Subaru, drawing on knowledge from having lived through her Book of the Dead in a previous timeline, revealed that he understood her far better than anyone else alive, including her connection to Elsa Granhirt. The name struck Mei Li like a blow, her face twisting with anger at having something so raw and private exposed. Subaru pressed on despite the obvious pain it caused, explaining that he understood Mei Li had loved and admired Elsa deeply, and that having her taken away had left Mei Li consumed by grief, rage, and a desperate hollow yearning she barely understood herself. He recognized her as fundamentally a lost, clumsy child, rather than a natural killer, someone who'd built her entire identity as a professional assassin around that unresolved loss, using murder as the only language she had left to process unbearable emotions. Mei Li denied seeking revenge, though her denial rang hollow, and Subaru acknowledged that whatever answer she was looking for, killing him wouldn't provide it. He asked her to trust him, promising to do what he could to keep things from getting worse, but Mei Li refused outright, saying nothing from his mouth could be trusted. Anticipating this reaction, Subaru proposed something different. Rather than a promise just between the two of them, he suggested a promise witnessed by someone else entirely. That someone was Emilia, who stepped out from where she'd been quietly listening the whole time, having been asked by Subaru beforehand to watch over the situation and intervene only if Mei Li tried something dangerous. Mei Li was stunned to learn the surveillance had been aimed at protecting her from her own worst impulses, not policing Subaru. Emilia calmly told Mei Li that she believed Subaru's account, and that if Mei Li remained doubtful, she was free to simply watch and wait. If Subaru ever broke his word, Emilia herself would be furious right alongside her. Subaru framed the whole situation as a kind of bet. Mei Li should let her hostility settle and see whether she still wanted him dead once given time and an alternative path forward, promising to help guide her through it rather than abandon her to her instincts. He insisted he wouldn't let her push him away, comparing it to how he'd once relied on adults around him at her age, declaring that he'd help her whether she wanted it or not, since she was far too young to be making life and death decisions entirely alone. Closing the distance between them, Subaru gently patted Mei Li's head, refusing to see her as a threat to be eliminated,
and instead treating her as a child who deserved to live and heal. Emilia came up from behind and wrapped her arms around Mei Li, pressing her cheek against the girl's, urging her to place her trust in the two of them, insisting that the confined, suffocating world of the Sand Tower was far too small a place for her to make any life-altering decision, and that she should carry her search for answers somewhere bigger, with their support behind her. Mei Li, overwhelmed and vulnerable, confessed that she didn't want to forget Elsa, and Subaru reassured her that she never had to. Loving someone she'd lost wasn't something to erase, but he gently cautioned her against mimicking the violent path Elsa had walked, urging her instead to find her own way forward. After several long, silent moments, powerless and adrift but no longer alone, Mei Li finally nodded in quiet agreement. Subaru stood at the top of the spiral staircase as the group climbed up to meet him, and the moment Mei Li caught sight of Beatrice and Shaula rising behind Emilia, her pale cheeks flushed, and she was left stammering, unable to find words. Subaru raised a hand in greeting to the shadows on the stairs and thanked Beatrice for guarding the rear, admitting with relief that at least the worst outcome, of him actually falling, had been avoided. Beatrice sniffed and reminded him sharply that nothing he did would have been forgiven had he truly fallen, insisting it was pure luck that things had turned out fine. Mei Li, bewildered by the sight of Beatrice and Shaula suddenly appearing, demanded to know what this all meant, and Subaru admitted the plan had essentially been him walking a tightrope. He confessed that the possibility of being shoved by her and simply dying had been very real, and that the only reason it hadn't happened was because he'd managed to catch her arms in time. Mei Li pointed out that Emilia had also been watching over them, but Subaru explained that Emilia's presence was only meant as a last resort, since if Emilia had also leapt down trying to save him, the situation could have spiraled out of control. Internally, the narration revealed that in the final moments of Subaru's previous loop, he had fallen together with Emilia, had embraced her, and had still failed to save her. A memory burned deep into his heart. And though he wished he could promise himself he would push her to safety if it ever happened again, his body simply wouldn't be able to process that much in the moment. So instead, he explained to Mei Li that he had arranged for both Beatrice and Shaula to be positioned below, specifically to prevent that emergency from ever occurring, since he already knew firsthand that Beatrice was a formidable mage. And while Shaula's true abilities remained something of a mystery, he had no doubt she possessed strength far beyond her appearance, having had her lift him just to test the plan before it happened. Mei Li murmured that there surely could have been easier, wiser methods, and Subaru agreed there probably had been, but explained that in his mind, taking the easy path always meant compromise, and taking the clever path always meant being unfair to someone, and he simply hadn't wanted to resort to either. Hearing this, Mei Li's eyes widened slightly, and she bit her lip softly. Subaru, giving her a strained, wry smile, clenched his fists as he thought about how badly he wanted to fix everything, how he was determined to do everything within his power to make that happen, and told her that was exactly why he hadn't hesitated to ask Emilia and the others for help. Emilia, who was hugging Mei Li from behind, with her chin resting on the small girl's shoulder, chimed in that she had been very surprised when Subaru first came to her with the plan, but that she'd known immediately how serious he was. And more than that, she'd been happy that he'd come to discuss it with her, rather than trying to shoulder it alone as he usually did, quietly finishing everything before she even noticed something was wrong. She said it made her happy that this time he'd let her think it through together with him, laughing that it felt strange to say so. Subaru, caught off guard by her words, admitted grudgingly that the version of himself from before really annoyed him, then quipped that maybe it was some kind of reward for that Subaru's shortcomings that he now got to hear her voice and see her face up close. To which Emilia simply replied she didn't understand what he meant, and he laughed it off while loosening his tense shoulders. The other two finally reached the top of the stairs, and Beatrice remarked again how relieving it was that nothing bad had happened, prompting Subaru to correct her gently, pointing out that plenty had happened given the enormous shift that had just occurred in Mei Li's mind and heart. Shaola, meanwhile, praised Subaru effusively, declaring she had no idea what he was talking about, but that his coolness was beyond compare. And when Subaru asked whether she actually respected him at all, the narration noted that despite her tendency to be impressed by anything he said or did, she had been the very first to back him when he proposed his plan to save Mei Li. And even if she hadn't put much deep thought into it, her unwavering support had genuinely saved him. Mei Li then turned to Beatrice and asked hesitantly whether she was angry with her. And Beatrice answered bluntly that of course she was, but that Mei Li looked like she might shatter to pieces if scolded too harshly. So for now, she'd let this particular incident slide, especially considering what had already happened in the sand dunes. But she immediately followed that mercy with a stern warning. This pardon applied only to this one incident, and Mei Li still bore the unforgiven sin of having burned the forbidden archive back in the previous mansion. And as long as that debt remained unpaid, Beatrice doubted she would ever fully forgive her. Mei Li froze at these words, but Amelia laughed and explained that Beatrice's use of the word probably meant she really would forgive Mei Li eventually if she stayed good, adding warmly how kind Beatrice truly was underneath it all. Beatrice flushed and snapped at Amelia not to say unnecessary things, while Mei Li softly said she would do everything she could to earn Beatrice's forgiveness. And Subaru nodded to himself in satisfaction, recognizing that real progress had finally been made. That whatever had driven Mei Li to believe Subaru had to die had at least been halted for now, even if this was only one tragedy among many still looming over the tower. Shaola then quietly asked Subaru whether it was truly acceptable to let the girl go unpunished after she had tried to kill him, watching with narrowed eyes as Beatrice, Mei Li, and Amelia went back and forth. Subaru admitted it was a dangerous question, but insisted it was fine, explaining that Mei Li had already been reproached, and that the real root of the problem was that no one had ever properly taught her why what she'd done was wrong. That teaching would now begin. Shaola pressed further, asking what would happen if Mei Li simply tried to kill him again after being taught. And Subaru answered that such a failure would only happen if he turned out to be extraordinarily bad at teaching, but reassured her that he wouldn't be the only one responsible for it. He acknowledged to himself that trying to single-handedly reshape the ethics of a girl raised from childhood to be an assassin would be an enormous undertaking, one he didn't have the strength to carry alone. But he had no intention of doing it alone regardless, having already leaned on Amelia and the others to stop the crime in the first place, and he intended to have them walk this road with him going forward as well. He then told Shaola directly that he wanted her help too, since it would be a long process of gently reshaping Mei Li's stubborn values. And when Shaola, stunned, pointed at herself and asked if he really meant her too, Subaru affirmed it, telling her she had a certain motherly, teacher-like presence about her, and that he wouldn't leave her out, urging her to put that maternal energy to good use in breaking through to Mei Li's hardened heart. Shaola pressed her hands to her face, murmuring over and over in overwhelmed disbelief that she too would be included, that she too would be working alongside Master Sama, dissolving into a string of astonished exclamations before snapping back and declaring with a flushed face that she had decided that she would raise little girl number 2 into a proper, upright person, just as Master Sama had ordered. She then dashed over to Amelia and the others, lifted Mei Li's small body with ease, and pulled her tightly into her ample chest, prompting Mei Li to yelp in surprise at being suddenly glomped by the naked One-san. Shaola reassured her that she could act as spoiled as she liked under her care, joking that her chest technically belonged to Master Sama, but that she'd generously share it with little girl number 2 for now, since the wealthy ought to give to the needy. Meili accused Subaru of having filled naked Orne-san's head with more strange ideas, and Subaru brushed it off by telling her to just accept the affection as compensation for worrying everyone, insisting he'd seen no ill intent in it. Meili, still squeezed between Shaola's chest, puffed her cheeks and grumbled that she'd let it slide, but that whatever had happened here needed to stay a secret from everyone else. At that, Subaru scratched his head awkwardly, and Meili's eyebrows furrowed at his reaction. Emilia gently stepped in to explain, apologizing that it was difficult to say, but that Subaru had already properly informed Ram and the others who hadn't been present. Meili's face twisted into an utterly pained expression at the news. The scene then shifted to the common use room, the space used for meals and conversation, where Ram stood waiting with her hands on her hips as the group returned safely. She remarked that they'd apparently cleaned everything up nicely, calling it commendable, and Subaru, recognizing this as high praise coming from her, accepted it happily, relieved that his bragging about the whole ordeal with Meili wouldn't backfire on him. A voice then noted, unprompted, that there had been no need to mention it, but that Ram had in fact been standing there waiting for their return the entire time, and Ram, stiffening, told the speaker, Echidna, currently inhabiting Anastasia's body, to restrain herself. Echidna smiled, remarking that Ram had held this same prickly attitude ever since learning Echidna was the one controlling this particular body, calling it endearing. She then turned her attention to Meili, still riding on Shaola's back and sulking with a bitter, wordless expression, and asked what she was so sulky about. When Meili refused to answer and simply averted her gaze, Echidna wondered aloud with visible unease whether the girl was upset because her murder plot had been foiled, and whether it was safe to leave her unrestrained. Subaru immediately jumped in to correct the misunderstanding, explaining that Meili was simply embarrassed that everyone now knew her private thoughts, calling it a childish, endearing kind of embarrassment. Echidna admitted that childish felt like an odd word to use given what the girl had attempted, but conceded that apparently even after losing her memories, someone's true nature doesn't change so easily, remarking that this must be quite the surprise for Subaru, who winked back at her, saying he was glad to be a source of entertainment for her, earning a scoff of amusement from Ram. Subaru then glanced around the room and asked where Julius was, wondering if he was in the bathroom or something, and a voice behind him remarked dryly that it was truly vexing how Subaru concerned himself with trivial matters even during a time of serious importance. Subaru turned to find Julius touching his own bangs, smiling with a faintly negative edge, having just returned from outside the room. Emilia asked innocently whether Julius had had a stomachache, and Julius quickly told her not to take Subaru's words at face value, noting that although he was her one and only knight, and she should trust him above anyone, sometimes even his more prominent words carried complications. Subaru cut in, telling Julius not to fill Emilia's head with unnecessary nonsense, pointing out that Julius was the one who hadn't even been present, and that he'd let it slide if Julius simply claimed he'd been in the bathroom. Julius let out a short, breathless laugh at that, one that struck Subaru as somehow off. Echidna then clarified that there was no need to worry, explaining that following their earlier discussion, Julius had gone to keep watch outside the tower from a balcony he'd discovered the previous night, since Meili's power to control witch beasts meant that if she had truly intended to carry out her goal, the witch beasts outside the tower would pose the greatest threat. Julius confirmed he'd kept watch from the balcony through the night and found no abnormalities outside, and that everything inside seemed to have resolved safely as well, admitting that when he'd first heard about the memory loss and everything that followed, it felt as though heaven and earth had been partly overturned. Subaru called that a massive exaggeration, joking that it wasn't really his place to say so given his own memory loss, and Julius agreed the phrase, heaven and earth overturned, was perhaps excessive, though only slightly, before expressing genuine relief that everyone was safe, admitting that if they had sought even Emilia's help and still ended in failure, there would have been no room left for recovery. Subaru said he felt the same relief, and jokingly noted that the two of them seemed close enough now to bicker like this,
earning another stiff laugh from Julius, one that Subaru noted, satisfied, no longer carried that earlier uncertain wavering. The narration reflected that this marked the 5th chance encounter since Subaru had lost his memories, and that in all that time, he hadn't had much peace, having spent far more of it with Amelia and the others, all while trying to preserve whatever connection the real Natsuki Subaru had built with them. He resolved to carefully trace in Natsuki Subaru's footsteps so there wouldn't be too great a gap, so that Amelia and the rest wouldn't have to feel the sorrow of truly losing him, since he didn't want to confront the reality that they had lost him directly, believing it was better not to face that truth at all if Natsuki Subaru's return meant Natsuki Subaru, the amnesiac imposter wearing his face, would have to disappear. Turning back to the group, Subaru declared it was time for their newly reformed, all-friendly team to get back to capturing the tower, asking if anyone objected. Amelia agreed readily, saying she had no objections and was ready to give it her all, while Beatrice grumbled that the name friendly team carried a strange sense of apathy to it. No one else raised any objections, which relieved Subaru for the moment. Julius asked whether it was truly fine to let Meili's situation rest as it was, and Subaru confirmed it would be fine, insisting she wouldn't act recklessly or try to kill him behind everyone's backs again, though he cautioned that whether she could keep that resolve going forward would depend on her growing up while watching how the rest of them carried themselves. So everyone needed to be careful not to let her see them look uncool or pathetic. Julius, turning his gaze to Meili, said he understood it was a matter of setting a proper example and asked to be entrusted with that responsibility. And the narration noted that though appearances seemed an odd way to frame it, becoming a role model was indeed the right way to describe it, and that Julius, through visible hard work built on natural talent and the refined environment he'd grown up in, had cultivated exactly the kind of self-discipline and excellence worth modeling. Qualities Subaru recognized as genuinely valuable, despite not having spent much time with him yet in this current state. Amelia suddenly grabbed Subaru's arm, startling him, and asked with concern whether he was really okay, whether he could keep up with all this conversation. Subaru yelped and jumped back, flustered by how close she'd gotten, and Amelia, noticing his overreaction, let out a soft, wounded, "Ah," asking whether he'd been getting startled by her ever since he lost his memories, wondering if there was something strange about her face. Subaru quickly reassured her there was nothing wrong at all, rambling that she simply had cute eyes, a cute nose, cute lips, and cute ears. Amelia thanked him for the compliment, but asked again why he kept reacting that way, and Subaru explained it was because her features didn't just add up individually, but seemed to multiply together, complementing each other perfectly, adding that her voice was cute too, that she herself was cute, that it simply wouldn't do, calling her an angel while covering his face and peeking at her through his fingers, as though she were too dazzling to look at directly. Beatrice interjected sharply, demanding he say that in a more Subaru-like fashion, and when Subaru asked what was wrong, she insisted he repeat the sentiment that Amelia looked like an angel, but phrased the way the real Subaru would say it. Subaru protested loudly that this was public humiliation and refused, insisting it was embarrassing, but quickly added that Beatrice too was cute like an angel and told her not to sulk, to which Beatrice replied that while it was certainly true she was cute like an angel, that wasn't the point at all, and she slumped her shoulders in visible disappointment. Feeling guilty, Subaru patted her head, and the group settled into a circle within the common use room, a proper setting to continue their conversation. Subaru then formally proposed that, with Meili now officially part of the team, they should hurry to leave the Sandy Tower once her position within the group had been properly settled, asking if there were any objections. Ram remarked dryly that his manner of speaking made her genuinely question whether he'd truly lost his memories at all, but conceded
that while his memory loss was a relatively minor problem compared to more serious matters, it remained a problem nonetheless. Emilia agreed, saying it wasn't as though his memories could simply vanish forever, insisting they needed to make sure Subaru got them back. But Subaru interjected, suggesting they disregard the matter of his memories for now. This drew surprised, "Huh?" from nearly everyone in the room, save for Shawla, who was too busy fussing over Meili after having earnestly accepted Subaru's earlier request, and so was left out of the immediate reaction. Beatrice pleaded with him not to make her and the others worry excessively, saying that while the memory loss itself had already been shocking enough, declaring it was fine not to recover them at all felt far too self-sacrificing and irresponsible. Emilia echoed the sentiment, asking gently whether he was trying to avoid being a burden to them, reminding him that he had consulted them about Meili's situation, and that in the same way, they wanted to think together about recovering his memories too, pleading with him to let them help. Subaru admitted her words struck right at his heart, but insisted he had a proper reason for prioritizing things the way he had, raising a finger to make sure everyone was paying attention, as he asked whether anyone truly believed his memory loss was unrelated to the tower itself. Shawla, unhelpfully,
admitting that leaving things as they were with his memories wasn't truly fine either, but that his own problem could wait, insisting that if they kept postponing their original goal, they'd never reach it at all, and that he wanted to focus on what needed to be done first. The room fell into a thoughtful silence at his plea, until Ram sighed and called him, truly, such a fool, turning her head to address everyone with her light crimson eyes, remarking that even after losing his memories, his pitiful intellect clearly hadn't changed one bit, meaning that, even if his memories returned, the current version of Barusu wouldn't be able to contribute much more than he already did, making it wasteful to prioritize recovering them now. She proposed they focus on capturing the tower first, and let his memories follow afterward. Subaru grumbled that she could have phrased it more gently, and Ram pointed out matter-of-factly that since he'd lost his memories in the process of trying to capture the tower in the first place, it only made sense that he should find them afterward as well, telling him plainly not to cause her any more trouble. The narration revealed that Subaru had once promised Ram he would remember everything, that he would get his memories back no matter what, and that he couldn't begin to measure how much it must have hurt her to hear him now suggest postponing that very promise. Yet it was precisely because of that promise that Ram had spoken the way she did, having made that vow with him despite knowing full well what a habitual promise breaker he was. Echidna added that, practically speaking, they had no actual method for recovering lost memories at present, and that she would side with Subaru and Ram's judgment, offering the optimistic possibility that the memories might simply return naturally over time. Julius offered a more measured agreement, saying he wouldn't place utmost priority on the memory issue and would instead focus on capturing the tower, but promised that should any opportunity arise to help recover Subaru's memories along the way, he would seize it without hesitation, adding firmly that Emilia and Beatrice must never be made to wear such sorrowful expressions again. Subaru nodded deeply at Echidna and Julius's words, before turning to look at Emilia and Beatrice. The two of them hesitated for a moment, before ultimately relenting, with Emilia saying that this time, however difficult it might be, she would be patient, but asked in return that Subaru forgive her for sometimes worrying about him more than anything else. Subaru, recognizing this as essentially a mirror of what he'd asked of them, could only apologize, bowing his head, and Beatrice let out a sad sigh, telling him that Emilia had said exactly what she herself had wanted to say, calling it the most effective argument, and telling him to properly reflect on himself. Subaru accepted this with a quiet agreement, and with everyone's approval secured, chimed in that Master Sama had also once hit his head on a urinal in the bathroom and lost his memories that way too, insisting there was no end to such incidents, and Subaru snapped at the outfielders to stay quiet for a moment, admitting her point couldn't be entirely dismissed, but that it wasn't relevant right now. Bringing the conversation back on track, he explained that he believed there was a direct connection between the tower and his memory loss. Echidna finished the thought for him, suggesting that fulfilling the conditions to capture the tower might naturally reveal the cause of his memory loss, or even the key to reversing it. And Subaru enthusiastically agreed that was exactly what he meant. Julius, stroking his chin, reasoned that if the tower's mechanism had stolen Subaru's memories, capturing it might bring them closer to an answer, or alternatively, that Subaru losing his memories might have been a direct consequence of getting too close to the truth already. Echidna agreed this seemed quite plausible, pointing out that during the capture of Taygeta, Subaru had displayed insight built on knowledge none of the rest of them could possibly possess, and that this unique knowledge may have pushed him far ahead of even her own understanding, ultimately costing him his memories as a result. Subaru protested that this was a wild overestimation of him, insisting he was just a shut-in whose only real skills were things like neatly spreading bedsheets and sewing. Emilia, meanwhile, pointed to the embroidery on her clothes, telling him he'd been the one to stitch it, a cute cat named Puck, and asked whether looking at it stirred any memories. But Subaru could only admit he had no idea, feeling a pang of sympathy as he considered that Puck was likely a pet she'd kept and named herself, one she hadn't brought along to the tower, making him all the more eager to get everyone home safely so she could be reunited with it. Ram remarked that it seemed quite convincing that Barusu had simply learned something he had no business learning, and as a consequence, foolishly lost his memories. Beatrice agreed that while Ram's phrasing was rather harsh, she largely felt the same way, admitting that although the notion of prioritizing the tower's capture over Subaru's memories was distasteful to her, it did have a valid point. Subaru, touched, started to say her name, but understood her frustration stemmed from not being able to place his memories as the top priority. And while it moved him deeply that she felt that way, he had his own reasons for the choice he was making. If they took their time leisurely searching for his lost memories, they wouldn't make it in time to prevent the tragedies still awaiting them in the tower. Tragedies that had already happened, and others yet to come. Ones that Subaru and everyone else needed to unite and prepare for. He appealed earnestly to the room. He steeled his resolve once more toward capturing the tower, moving straight into his next proposal. That they all go together to search the library of Taygeta for any trace of Reed's book.